Kerry Cassidy. She's definitely one of my favorites, the founder of the great website, Projectcamelotportal.com. She's been at the center of the truth movement now for more than 18 years. She is an author. She's an avid researcher. She's a world traveler. Kerry is a visionary. She's a remote viewer. She's an intuitive. I think you can remote view. I threw that in there. I'm not really sure, but I know you're an intuitive. You have an incredible body of work behind you, thousands of interviews with some of the most amazing whistleblowers we've ever heard from. So Kerry Cassidy is a legend, and it's always an honor to welcome her back on my platform. Kerry, it's great to see you.
Okay, I should can that introduction. That was really sweet.
Well, it's the truth. What was I right about your remote viewing?
Yeah, I actually did study it a bit. Mainly, I'm a psychic intuitive, so I would rather do that. But I have had some sort of miraculous hits as far as remote viewing goes, so I know I can do it. It's kind of not my style, if you will, because it's a little bit too methodical and too, I guess, what you call left brain. It's more left brain, and I'm more right brain. So I prefer that I get my information mainly from dreams and visions. But occasionally I have done, like I said, I had some really good hits on that.
Okay. All right. Well, I think maybe I had remote viewing on the brain because I was watching your interview with Michael Jaco a little bit earlier. So maybe that's where that slipped in there. But I know you both have those abilities. So it's great to welcome you back, Kerry. We have a lot to talk about. I mean, you and I do a lot of interviews together. We have a lot of conversations, and every single time we always have a full slate of topics to talk about. And I thought maybe the first thing we could touch upon tonight was this incident in Miami that, right on the heels of the Epstein document dump, we had this story out of Miami that there were these non-terrestrials at the shopping mall. And quite honestly, I mean, you saw the videos. Everyone out there, I'm sure, has seen the videos. They look faker than a $3 bill. I mean, it was obviously, at least to me, it looked like some very bad CGI. But pretty much everyone looked at that and said, oh, yeah, that's got Project Bluebeam beta test written all over it. And like I said, I mean, it was right on the heels of the Epstein document dump. Certainly, they're looking for any kind of distraction. And I know that this is a subject that you are very well versed on. So, we had the mainstream media tell us that there was some teenage brawl at the mall, and that's why there were, all these police there. But when you looked at the police presence, I mean, it was like dozens and dozens and dozens of police cars. But the images were absolutely, I mean, to me, they were just comical. They looked so fake. And I just thought I would get your take on that. And I haven't really listened to all your recent interviews. You probably talked about this, but I guess for the benefit of my audience, this got a lot of attention.
Can you hold on? I think someone's at my door. So hold on.
Sure. Sure. All right. Stand by, everybody.
Hello? Hello? Okay, maybe they're just dropping something off. Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. Maybe a package
that, or something. Never happens normally, but of course, these kind of things go on. But yeah. Okay, so the mall thing, I did talk about that a bit with Jaco earlier today, but I can augment that a bit. So the bottom line, I think, is that it was a Project Bluebeam. I think that's why you get the, it's where the video is kind of fluctuating and all of that. I think the alien story down in Peru is very similar. The reports are very similar that these beings are supposedly, if they're beings, coming in and out of this dimension, or it's flickering in and out, whether it's a hologram type thing. So it's possible. My understanding of holograms, by the way, is that the planes that flew into the Trade Center were holograms. So holograms, according to John Lear and also Norm Bergram, a scientist that I interviewed, fascinating man who wrote The Ringmakers of Saturn, he talked about how real, and this is years ago now, that holograms can look. So the fact that they didn't look as real as they could look is kind of an interesting twist to the story. I don't know if you know who the real police chief is that I've interviewed him. Don't be confused with the fake one that's on Twitter, but there's a real one. He has a website. It's called Buy Me a Coffee. It starts with that. I linked it on my Telegram. He also reported on this, and he usually has some very good intel. called it a blue beam thing, and also said that something, I can't remember exactly, but he's got some information there. I also, this is kind of strange. Okay, so there is a parallel to the exact location on Florida as there was in Peru, like a direct line on the, whatever you call that, longitude, latitude, whatever. Someone sent me that. So that's kind of an interesting link up, indicates forethought, if you will, and planning. So, I was making jokes that they were actually on their way to go to Mar-Lago, and they went to Mal-Lago instead, because in Florida, because they just got their words wrong in their directions, if they're aliens. But it also does look, I don't know why, but on a psychic intuitive level, I got that it might have been the tall whites. Now, they might have been recruited by the CIA to actually do this demonstration. So when you have Project Bluebeam, you may think it's going to be all holograms, but it's very possible when you have alien races visiting the planet that we can get, they can be recruited even by the dark side to do demonstrations, to get involved in some kind of skirmishes, whatever. That kind of understanding that it's much wider of a playing field. And I used to say, in fact, I told Randy Kramer this when he talked about Project Bluebeam and how they were planning it. The military, he's a Marine, he was on stage in the Pacific Northwest with me at a conference. This is many years ago. And he said within 3 years, they were going to do an alien invasion scenario. It would be, CGI. It would be on your televisions. It would, the battles would be fake so that they could win them all. The aliens would be, whatever they created, holograms, whatever. And I at the time, I was in the audience, even though I was speaker, right, listening to him. And so I basically raised my hand and said, well, how can you have an alien invasion when the real ones are already here? Right. And he actually came down off the stage, went stomping right up to my face. And this is a Marine, okay? And looked like he was going to beat me up. He got very upset at me, but he is triggered because he's been on Mars fighting aliens a lot. If you ever listen to my interview with him or all the interviews he's done, which is quite substantial. So what I would say is the same thing here. As far as I'm concerned, it's not one or the other. It's going to be a combination, and they could easily work with certain aliens to generate images and various things because they want to redirect the attention to this alien question. Now, it's not just the bad guys that want to do this. Interestingly, I posed this notion to Captain Mark Richards, one of my main interviewees, and he worked in the secret space program for most of his young life, up until the age when he got, and so he had an agenda there. Anyway, that's I know it's a misdirect to some degree, but I have to say that he basically talks about how we humans have botched our interactions a lot of times with various visiting races. And we're also going out into the solar system, whether people want to admit it or not, and colonizing moons of Saturn's various places. Now, Rendlesham was a major ET encounter. And even to this day, they go crazy and won't tell you the real truth about what happened there. But there seems to have been even an AI component to that Rendlesham story, by the way. And when I decided to re-examine the evidence and talk to people when I was there one time, this was a year or two ago, and we were in a car on a 2-lane road, country road, at night around 12 midnight, and there was a black SUV headed to us, except they were in our lane headed towards us. And we kept honking, flashing lights, everything, and nothing would change that trajectory. So we had to leave our lane, go into the opposing lane of traffic. Now, luckily, it was late at night and there was no opposing traffic. And that car, they were like mind controlled or programmed or whatever, just kept going. So and we knew that they were basically, I mean, it was only quick thinking, but getting us out that lane. Anyway, just saying, when they don't want you to investigate something, they are really serious
Very clear,
about
yeah.
it. And so, okay, get back to the mall thing. Bottom line is, I seem to think that it might have been the tall whites that got it roped into doing this. Why do I think the tall whites? I don't know. It just came to my mind, and sort of an interesting thing happened when I first heard the news. I had a Kundalini, what you call a Kundalini activation. And it just happened all of a sudden. Now, it could have nothing to do with this, but it was kind of interesting that it all of a sudden happened very quickly, right when I heard the information. And then what came to mind was the tall whites. And the tall whites have a base in Nevada, in case you're not familiar. And there's a guy named Charles Hall who has written books about his encounters with them. He was a military guy that was based out there all by himself. He was a weatherman kind of person who was supposed to report the weather over a certain period of time and stuff like that. And he rarely saw another human being, but he actually got to know these tall whites, and they have a very interesting camouflage. I don't know how much you've followed that story, but they are not violent. They are not a threat. They have been having a peaceful, their own, installation here. But one of the tricks about them, or interesting, quirky things, is that they like to go shopping, in disguise shopping, in Vegas. So they love shopping. So it's kind of interesting that there is a shopping mall, and maybe that's why it came to my mind. Maybe it has nothing to do with it, or maybe there's something there. So I think it's a combination. I think it could easily be, a portal open up using technology, fake, blue beam, hologram stuff. Or it could be the tall whites recruited to take part in this sighting to raise consciousness, because there's no doubt about it. As you might have noticed, there's sort of a soft move to get the outing of the ET presence here on Earth right now. And as I said, Randy Kramer predicted they're actually overdue. They're about a year or two overdue. They were supposed to do it within 3 years of when he talked about it. It didn't happen, actually. So they got interrupted, but now they're back on track. So whatever you want to say. I mean, I can.
So this is a white hat agenda, is what he was saying, that this was like soft
No,
exposure. No,
not necessarily white hat. When you talk about the secret space program, that is an uncharted territory in terms of who's in charge. Okay, on that level, because that is, as you can appreciate, first of all, our NASA and various organizations, excuse me, associated were basically infiltrated, as my interviews with William Tompkins talks about, which is our secret space program was jump started by the bringing over of the Nazis during Project Paperclip. But at the same time, and they were helped by the beings from Aldebaran, who I believe are reptilian human hybrids. So that whole thing is Maria Orsich and the Foo Fighters and all of that. On top of it, apparently, according to William Tompkins, the reptilians and the Pleiadians were working both sides of our space program. On the one hand, the Pleiadians were helping us, the reptilians were sabotaging us and helping us, and it goes like that. Now, we even recently had a spacecraft that was supposed to go to the moon and do something. I don't know what, but again, it was taken down, right? This happens all the time. And what William Tompkins clearly talked about was there are reptilians that our astronauts did go to the moon. They had help. So they didn't go in these little tin cans like people think, but they did have help. So they, Stanley Kubrick also did what you call a demonstration kind of thing, so that they had covered the bases. Because what happened when they got to the moon is they had reptilians waiting for them, and a greeting party, if you will, basically telling them to get the fuck out. So we have been dealing with reptilians and fighting over even territory and various things on the moon and Mars and various other planets. They're also trying to take over Earth again. And this is why we get some of the things that are happening here.
Okay. All right. So it's not necessarily when I heard you explain it that way, I kind of thought to myself that maybe the white hats are trying to, slowly drip out this, but it sounds to me like if it's anything associated with Blue Beam, to me, it would be a deep state agenda. I mean, I don't think the white hats would really go that route and try to, I mean, who knows at this point? I mean, we're going to be talking tonight a lot, I think, about the white hats and their
Yes.
tactics and what they've been up to. So, I mean, I guess at this point, anything's on the table, given the fact that we're in 2024, right? But to me, it would seem kind of intuitive that if it's something that seems blue beam related, that it would probably be deep state. But like you said, and I agree, the strange part about the story is that the images all look so fake. I mean, it's just like you didn't even have to have a trained eye to look at that and say, wow, I mean, Hollywood comes out with better stuff in the movies. So
sure, but you have to keep in
exactly.
mind that there was some insane amount of cops where it's like 50 to 80 cop cars. They weren't just there to come over there and see what was what. They probably were there to confiscate phones and to, there was probably even technology used to mess with the phones and whatever videos people took. So there was interference. We have not gotten clear video, and that's typical of what, when they interfere. The other thing is, again, what I'm trying to say about the secret space program and any kind of blue beam or whatever you want to call it, you've got the light and the dark operating there, and we don't have good information about the white hats relationship with the secret space program. We know that Space Force was organized by Trump to kind of put a face to the sort of space program at the same time, an umbrella organization kind of thing. And then Juan always goes, oh, it's not outer space, it's cyberspace.
Yeah.
And that's also a misdirect, okay, because it's both. So we've gotten a lot of double talk, a lot of lies. We're not getting a straight story. You don't think you're getting a straight story on Earth. You're definitely not getting a straight story on underground bases, who's running them, and who's going outer space, out to outer space, and I'm not a flat earth person. So, that gets into a whole nother thing.
No, we don't have to get into that. No. All right. Well, I mean, I'm just kind of curious too, because I mean, like I said, we're going to talk a lot about the white hats and, as we always do. I mean, usually Juan comes up in our conversations because both of us follow, the information he puts out closely, but it's interesting to me that, the images that I saw, and certainly I can't say that I saw everything that it was out there, but the images that I saw looked so cartoonish almost. And when I see something like that, it always gets me to kind of scratch my head and think, well, is this the white hats kind of pulling our chain here to get, to raise consciousness, but also at the same time to, no. Okay.
It's not a white hat. I definitely personally don't think it's a white hat move at all.
Well, I don't think this one specifically, but it just kind of, it was strange to me that if the deep state was going to go this route, that they didn't, bring their A game, so to speak,
No, but that's what they do. I don't think you really realize that. They also do this in false flags, and they'll purposely, in essence, fuck up on purpose. And if you've ever talked to, oh God, what's his name? There's a whistleblower out there about false flags, and they talk, with Ole, and they talk about how they set them up and everything. They make huge mistakes on purpose. It's insane. They can do it much better. So same thing here. And they're not going to trot out their best stuff at the very beginning of Blue Beam, right? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about, actually, at this point, if I know it correctly, we've got three isolated incidents, okay? One is in Nevada, right? Vegas, the sighting of tall beings. You remember that report, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Kind of look like you're blank.
No,
okay. And
I'm sorry.
Okay. And no worries. And then Peru. Okay. And the people in the jungle freaking out completely.
Mhm.
And I did a conference call with a person who went down to investigate that and came back and reported stuff. For some reason, they didn't follow my advice. They didn't come forward. They're still in hiding, blah, blah, blah. And then the Florida thing. So in actually a relative short period of time, if you want to call it that, like 6 months, I would say, I could have that, not exact. We've had 3 tall beings sightings that are hazy, have witnesses. We don't know exactly, don't have good film, don't have good pictures, but whatever. So I'm just saying that this is a beginning of something, okay? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look like Technicolor, Hollywood style, CGI or whatever. In other words, if it's too good, you should be suspicious of that. It's the way they operate, the Illuminati, by the way. They want what they always want is what's called plausible deniability. Okay. That means you can go either way with it. They want people to be in a state of fear, number 1, and confusion, number 2. And you can't have fear without confusion. Okay. So they're going to try to confuse you, and they're going to play both sides. Those are like principles. Every time you analyze any situation, you want to look at those that from that standpoint. And that's my point of view.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit here. I wanted to talk. I mean, I mentioned your conversation with Michael Jaco, and I think an interesting topic that I want to get your take on is this whole idea that Michael seems to be embracing, at least, or exploring to some degree, and a lot of folks out there kind of thinking along these same lines, questioning whether or not Trump is really still around. Whether he's or whether, he said something today about his remote viewing abilities, how he hasn't seen Trump in a very long time, and that the white hats seemingly have been dormant for such a long time that, he's starting to go down this road and really question that. So I'm curious, I think you gave a pretty good take on that today, but for the purposes of my audience, of people who maybe haven't heard you weigh in on this, because, he did a video on that prior to interviewing you that got a lot of attention, a lot of views, and, for good reason. I think people are wondering what's going on. People just want the truth at this point. Now, I personally don't believe it, but I'm curious to hear what your perspective is.
Well, it's kind of mixed. Number 1, and I even said this to his face on the air earlier today, that I think somebody put him up to it. Okay. That's just my thought. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't also have those thoughts himself. Okay. But they probably challenged him and or thought it was a good idea. And this gets into this idea of playing both sides. And whether we like it or not, the white hats have learned a lot of things from the dark hats. And one of those is to play both sides. So I think they like to play devil's advocate themselves and throw things out there that just to see how the audience is going to react. Okay. And I'm sure they're getting all kinds of feedback and blah, blah, blah. People jumping on the bandwagon, people saying, no way, and then the people in the middle, maybe whatever they're thinking. But from my point of view, it's a very convenient situation. And I think it might be a trifle staged, this idea. So first of all, I said on Jaco's show, and I'll say here, that not only did I have a dream about him in July, August of this year, the summer, where I was in Morocco and I was out from under the super heavy matrix. And I get great dreams when I get away from here. So, and it was all about Trump, and he was standing at my side with a bunch of files and a briefcase and basically acting like a lawyer. And he was telling me that he was going to, be in my court and stand on my side and protect me no matter what. And it was a very loving dream. It was a very wonderful dream. I've never had a dream like that before. I wish I had, but I never did. So I can't say, it's true or not true. All I can tell you is what came through was very strong Trump being alive. However, I do think that he has to be in hiding. Now, he may be in NORAD, or he may be somewhere else. There's lots of places to hide on the planet, I can say. And I think there are a lot of doubles out there right now. of Trump.
I agree with that.
And I've been noticing that more and more lately. So, and I do think, it's kind of like we're in a game where it's ratcheting up and we're getting closer and closer to this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, where they would want to take out a person who is clearly already winning an election, hasn't even happened, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty much freaking them out. And I do think that there is no accident that this JFK movie, X movie, that Jay Weidner, and I know Jay well, has directed and brought forward. Or actually, I don't think he directed. I think he produced it. But anyway, he wrote it. So I think we could go down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, unfortunately, I was explaining to Kerry that she told me about the film, and I tried to watch it today. I bought it on Amazon Prime, and I actually even showed her the picture on my phone. Every time I go to hit the play button, it just won't load the video. So whether that's because there's some sort of sabotage there, or whether there's just an enormous amount of people that are watching it, which I think would be an excellent thing if that's the case. I haven't had a chance to see it, but I did get the basic overall gist, I think, by listening into your commentary a little bit earlier today, which seems to be your take on it. No, it's okay. I have a little bit of throat thing too. It's
okay. My throat chakra is just actually being slightly attacked right now. So I know about this kind of stuff. Anyway.
Okay.
It'll pass.
It'll pass.
So I'm sorry. Did you ask me?
I was kind of building up to it. I was just sort of building up to
sorry about that.
About this this film that I haven't had a chance to see, but I understand the basic premise behind the film. But I also understand that you have some insiders who have pointed out certain things in the film that might be missing. And your theory that you shared a little bit earlier today. I mean, I don't want to ask you to rehash the same exact material, but I think it was very interesting. And I think the film and the interview, certainly, I think going hand in hand will be very interesting out there for folks to watch. So, I mean, you wanted to talk about this. You can give us, whatever information. I mean, I don't know how many folks out there have had a chance to see it. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, there may be a spoiler alert here, but Kerry, go ahead and tell us a little bit about why this film is so important. Because I've heard about JFK
and the JFK movie, and the fact that Jay Weidner, I know him very well, or I feel that I do. I've known him for many, many years, and I met him in person and over at Gaia TV when he worked there, and so forth. And I can say, I've interviewed him over the years. So I can say that he's a very serious guy. He's a wonderful filmmaker. He's a brilliant man. He wouldn't do this just, for a joke or something. He's very, a great researcher. And I believe he might have been given this piece of information, which is the squib. Okay. The squib idea. And then he probably did the investigation himself on that. And that investigation, by the way, relies in a huge way on the Zapruder film, right? That he clearly says has basically gotten spliced, and some seconds were taken out of it, both before and, if I understand it, before and after the car passes this highway sign thing that kind of blocks your vision of things. And after the film, after he comes, the car comes out from behind the sign, has been tested, and it's a completely different kind of film than the part before that. And by the way, what no one seemed to be saying, or not even Jay, was that the crowd, talk about sparse. There was almost nobody on the other side, of the grassy side of the car. Mm-hmm. So there was no audience supposedly after it passed the sign, which doesn't make any sense. So that means they took out people from the film and they substituted another piece, a totally number piece. Now, it's also the squib thing is, I worked in Hollywood for 20 years. So I totally know about stunt people, stunt doubles, some of the equipment they use, various things. Everyone in Hollywood knows all about squibs. So maybe back in those days they didn't, and I appreciate that. But the reality is that there's also many things in the film which go unexplained. So I don't feel, and I'm going to talk to Jay about this. I'm going to question him as to what things he investigated and what things he didn't. And he just let the questions lay there. And that's an issue. But you got to understand, we always tend to think when we look at anything in our lives and in this, there has been a trend to try to isolate events and isolate, perpetrators, if you will, thinking there's no relationship between this event that happened over there and something that happened even 10 years ago. That's not true. There is a through line and a connection with everything that we see. And it's probably a lot more of a connection than you realize. There are timelines, and there are the Illuminati work with a long view towards their goals. Okay. And they have been working towards their goals much longer than the White Hats. Okay. So when we look at these incidents, we need to see them on a sort of a timeline and trajectory. So when you go from the Kennedy assassination, and I've had to refresh people's minds as to the history of the White Hats, for example, because no one seemed to understand, they popped out of nowhere, they're associated with Q, what the hell's going on, all that kind of stuff. But to me, because I dealt with the White Hats before they ever came forward, there's a through line. So in the same sense, here we have Jay Weidner getting a piece of information that I think he was given, okay? And I think they let him run with it. And then the film, he works on the film, it comes out. His only really new information in the entire film is the squib, okay? Everything else is pretty traditional, what he comes forward with. It's put together very nicely, and it's substantiated that way. But the interesting thing is in the film, and I know you haven't seen it, but people who have will know, and people that didn't see it can look and see what I'm talking about when they see it. It's very interesting that Jay makes a huge thing about Life magazine taking out footage from the Zapruder film before they gave it to the Warren Commission, but he never talks about what's missing in the film. In other words, he never focuses on what could possibly be in those seconds they chose to take out. And why would they do it? Like in a certain sense, like when you analyze film, and I know this is kind of weird, but a lot of people don't think about this, but when we do something here in this age, like let's say this is 2024. In 2030, in 2030, do you realize that when the Illuminati think about these things, if anything, they start in 2030 and go backwards. So they will know that the things that we missed in this age might reemerge in that age. Do you see what I'm saying? So we work in a world of cycles, and there is a spiral effect, okay, into life. And even the Native Americans use the spiral as the basic sort of image of life. And there's a reason for that, because not only do we circle around over the same ground, but we actually circle around and go up a level or down a level. So our perspective changes. We don't go over the exact same stuff. It's not a circle. We actually are going on a spiral where you're coming around to the same moment in history, but you're seeing it from a higher level with a different perspective. And that changes everything. Your perspective is most important. So when we look back at these times, and I think it's very useful as a human to start widening your view of what you're doing now and how it might be viewed in the future, right? By other humans, including your children, by the way, because that might change your behavior. Seriously. I mean, some of these people, they just clueless completely. They're not taking their behavior in this day and age in context and realizing how it's going to look in the future, like all those people that were like Nazis and they were put up on charges and the military has terminated them. And there's a long list, and you have to, spend $5 a month to be on his, website. I've interviewed him. I asked him every question under the sun. He's a lovely man. But be sure don't go to the Twitter fake, because there's a guy faking him. It's not him. So only go buy me a coffee, whatever his website is. So all I'm saying, he's just one example. There's lots of them. Gene Decode has been talking about this forever, right? And so on. So what we have is a crisis in consciousness, where people do not want to accept anything that they can't see with their own eyes and make it, like black and white and very obvious. And yet we live in a universe of multi-dimensions, maybe even unlimited dimensions. And what you think is like the flat earth is actually the fourth dimension, and that you're not understanding. You actually think like the table my computer's on right here is actually solid when it's not. We aren't even solid. We are time travelers. We can actually move from one dimension to another. We can open portals. And what happened at the mall is about opening portals to let things in. Okay. We can let things in, but we can also go out. Okay. And you do it every night when you leave, when you go to sleep anyway. So it's a funny dilemma that consciousness on the planet is. Some people are totally in the know with me and they understand all of this, and they're on a spiritual level. Others just want to block it all out and pretend that material reality is all there is.
Yeah, well, I absolutely I think that there are a lot of people out there who are just, they're not even ready to go there. And I think part of it is the fact that we're living through a time right now where nobody really knows which end is up. And I think that's a big reason why so many of these theories are being put out there. Now, I like Michael Jaco. I've had him the opportunity to talk to him a couple of times. I think he's a patriot. I think he's a really good guy. And certainly, it's possible that he's, that's an interesting concept, though, that he was perhaps put up to it. I didn't actually catch that part of the interview or see what his response or his body language when you said that. I'd be curious to see that. But I definitely think he's a patriot. But, the fact of the matter is that a lot of people are questioning the white hat tactics. And I mentioned, there's a couple different things I want to get into in this vein, but I mentioned Juan O'Savin, talking about, you and I have had lengthy discussions about his shift in narrative having to do with the, citizens picking up arms. And then, there was also this, what appeared to me to possibly be another sort of a narrative shift as well, because he was talking recently about the court cases that are rapid. I mean, he's been talking about this for a long time. Don't get me wrong. It's not like this is sudden and new, but he's been talking about these court cases that he says are very, very rapidly advancing, and they're going to lead to within a matter of weeks. It sounded to me like in the interview that I heard him do on, I think it was Psych Club with Tom Numbers at the end of December. He was saying that, we don't have months. We're talking more like weeks instead of months. But these cases, he said that there were over 100 cases he was involved in. And there were 3 in particular that really are going to be like the dominoes that start to, bring down all the others. And it raises the question to me about, well, what about the fact that we know that we can't get justice in the Justice Department? He's been very clear about that. He's been, there was one of his, his famous phrases is no justice in the Justice Department, or you can't fix DC because it's already fixed. And so now, but it's, so this is like this strange, I don't want to call it a narrative shift, but this seems to me like this sort of dichotomy or something where, on the one hand, he's talking about how DC is broken, which we all agree. The courts are fixed. The whole system is fixed. It's all cooked. He doesn't have to convince any of us of that. I think the harder sell is whether or not we're actually going to get to justice. Because, I mean, if these cases are that significant, are they simply significant in terms of waking people up and raising consciousness? Are we actually going to get to justice? Do you really think that these elite criminals are going to be brought to justice in the system that they built essentially to insulate themselves? Or did what Q tell us about, think logically, the military is the only way, is ultimately that the direction that it has to go? So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that. And then really also the idea of whether or not we're ever going to get, and this is related to what you were talking about when you broke last time, which was really this tangled web that's been woven here are we ever going to get to the truth? Are we ever going to get the white hats ever going to give us the truth? Because it seems so complex at this point that it would just make people's minds explode. You know, like just the idea that Oprah Winfrey's a bad person is going to make people's mind explode, let alone all these things that we're talking about. So I'll leave it at that. Go ahead and give us your response to, you know, to what I said about Juan, and then whether or not we're ever going to get to the truth.
Okay. Well, and I actually have been asking these questions. So I am behind the scenes texting Juan pretty regularly. And one of the things that I'm also texting him, even in a group that we're part of, and so other people see my questions as well, is, you know, how is it that we can suddenly, you know, he can suddenly talk about these cases? Now, let me look at this situation, because I don't know, 6 months ago, the courts were completely corrupt. Every case that was brought before any court, Trump's going to come forward. It's going to be common knowledge in the mainstream, where families are going to be talking about the fact that we have two presidents, and that's by June. So what the hell is changing? I want to know. I want to know why Congress, who is clearly completely derelict during the time of the election steal and was asked to examine the evidence, even Radcliffe, the leader of all the intelligence agencies who filed at least some semblance of a report, even though it was late, basically stated that the CCP had influenced and had been operating in the election steal, in essence. So they didn't look at it. They refused to look at it. They were given 10 days to do so. And even the Brunson case numbers the number of Congress people, and it's huge. I think it's in 300 or something, who refuse to be. So we've got a Congress that is completely, I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat, they're completely taken over by the deep state, by the cabal, or under their thumb, or being blackmailed by a honeypot situation, a la Epstein, etc.
And a lot of the folks out there that people think are good, I got news for you. I think a lot of these people, you're going to be really
even
surprised.
The leader, the guy they chose as the speaker, isn't he the Speaker of the House?
Johnson.
What?
Mike Johnson?
Yes. Yeah. He's been accused of all kinds of stuff. He does not sound like a good guy by any stretch. The trouble is, these are the people that are going to suddenly switch day for night and go along with, they've got these so-called committees, and they're investigating things from the committee standpoint, and suddenly they're going to be believed, and the Republican, the Senate and the Democrats are all suddenly going to get on board together and believe that there was a steal and blah, blah, blah. I mean, how is this transition going to take place when these places are fully corrupt? And they continue to demonstrate their corruption, by the way. It's not like they suddenly became good guys overnight. So I fail to see how that's going to happen. Now, what I'm positing is this another Trump with his envelopes going around the world and handing those envelopes up, which has been clearly filmed, in which he's basically, in essence, telling those players, those top world leaders, that if you don't get on board with us, we're going to out you, which is a form of blackmail, however you want to, slice it or dice it. I mean, you're dealing with a dark side that is not about to stand down. And so how do you get all these members, all these judges that are, so corrupt, to suddenly come onto your side? Well, you'd probably have to up the stakes and blackmail them even more than the regular side is blackmailing them.
I mean, unless they've already done this behind the scenes, unbeknownst to them.
I'm just saying. And then, now let me tell you, okay, that's the bad side. Now, let me tell you something else. So I was told by a source that the white hats are actually being run out of the Pentagon. Now, this sounds absurd to average people, but they have systematically been coming in and turning these people. Now, some of them get turned by outing what their bad behavior was and bringing them on board, getting them to sign an agreement. This is basically what they've been doing, infiltrating places like the Pentagon. I think they took over Mount Weather. I think that was a true report. I've gotten verification of that. I can tell you that Mount Weather is an installation near Washington, D.C. that is very primary to actually the whole broadcast, communications industry. And they're still fighting, however, what's called the senior, is it called the secret or senior executive service? People, members that are lifetime members who are still part of that incredibly corrupt organization. And they're still installed in many of our military, for example, and not only some of the military. I mean, even recently we did a show in which you were sort of talking about how Juan was saying, well, the White Hats don't really have most of the military. In fact, they only have, Space Force and a small group of maybe the Navy or whatever it is.
He said only about 20% recognize Trump as commander in chief. That's what he said.
So how can we have these two? What I'm talking about is a disconnect here. Now, maybe let me just say this. When you try to obfuscate the truth and you tell somebody something, you have to remember exactly what you told them. And when you do it publicly, even more so, right? So we are all listening very carefully to him. Someone like me who's been listening for 3 years, so much so that I got really sick of it and then stopped for, a month or two, because I couldn't stand these right-wing religious diatribes full of fantasy and, sugar that made me ill. So, what we're talking about is someone who has to keep a through line in his head as to what he said and what he's saying now. And by the way, it's really kind of interesting. At least my source, or one of my sources, recently talked to me saying, no talk about revolution, no talk about, people having to defend their homes, this and that. And by the way, look at the timeline. Trump, again, if he's going to be two presidents in common, and he actually cited this psychic who several years ago predicted there would be a time when our American people would be talking about how we have two presidents. Mm-hmm. So it actually has a precedent that we might have two presidents. So now
what has to happen between now and then?
That's going to happen between now and June. Okay. That puts some pressure. I mean, I'm happy to see pressure being put on the White Hats to stand and deliver. Okay. I've been asking them to stand and deliver for a while. Now, I'm not also that critical to where I don't know they're not operating behind the scenes. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're working their asses off, whether it's going into underground bases and rescuing children. And by the way, they have to fight reptilians down there, which they never tell you. Gene Decode doesn't even talk about that, right?
Oh, yeah, he does.
Right? Does he?
He talks about the
battles with reptilians. I mean, I know he refers to them, but he doesn't actually talk about them having to fight. So we need a solution. We need to deal with these invaders. We have invaders from underground. We have invaders at our borders. We have, groups of Chinese military special forces coming in, documented. All right. And one probably isn't wrong that we might have to defend our homes against some of these invaders. If you've seen the video of the hordes headed towards our border, it's absolutely insane. There's a loudspeaker in the background, basically chanting and contributing to their mind control. They think they're coming for some of those people, I'm sure, are just good, even, women and children and other people that just really do want jobs and really do want to escape the cartels, because God knows South America is just run and completely, signed, sealed, delivered. And so is Central America with cartels, and they'll just knock you off to, as easy as they breathe. So when you're looking at that scenario and you want to come north because you've been told you get a free credit card that lasts, I don't know, a month or whatever it lasts, and now the border is wide open, et cetera, then of course you're going to go. But still, it's insane. There is a level of gray ET mind control programming over what is in essence gray human hybrids that have been raised and born in the southern parts of below our border. And I've talked about this a lot. And that what is in essence the X-Men is a true story. It's true. It's going to be what we deal with in the future. And even the future is now. So our military knows exactly what I mean. There's a good side to it. Some of these beings will be, good-hearted and so on. But if you bring in a lot of gray DNA in with the human package, then you're also going to get entities that are not empathic. That's part of the problem they have, okay? And why they look the way they do is, and this gets into the work of Dan Burish and exposing the fact that they have little or no emotionality. They're just little robots, okay? So they're not going to be empathic. They're not going to care whether they hurt you or whether they, whatever they want, they'll want and they'll get. It's that kind of mentality. Well, so that's a whole nother side of this story.
Okay. Well, I wanted to go back to this concept though of the white hats, not telling us the truth, because I think there probably is a chorus of everybody out there listening who is saying WTF right now, right? Like we want the truth. We need the truth. And it's not just a simple matter of like, we want it or even that we need it. It's fundamental, I believe. I mean, if they continue to coddle us by not giving us the truth, and I can understand not dumping out the entire swamp, the entire sewer. I mean, the swamp is, as Trump calls it, on day one. I get it. Okay. But if we're still being coddled and we're still being treated with kid gloves, and there are still people sitting around in rooms somewhere, whether they're dark rooms or light rooms or underground or wherever they are, deciding what we can and can't handle, then what are we awakening to? Calling it the Great Awakening is a fallacy if that's the case. So I just don't, I have a real issue with that. And I mean, look, I'm just a person out there. I'm just a voice who's not necessarily going to change anything. But I think collectively, if enough of us demand more of the truth, that it puts more pressure on them to reveal more to us. I personally believe that we need the truth on every level. And people it should be revealed to us, disclosed to us to the degree that we seek it out. Certainly. I mean, again, I don't think you should walk into Times Square and see Frazzle Drip playing or something along those lines. I'm not suggesting that we go total shock and awe. I get that you have to artfully, I guess for lack of a better term, disclose all this to an unsuspecting people. But at the end of the day, if we don't know the truth, if we don't know everything that's been going on, and especially us, the awakened, who have been following this now for years, doing the very best that we can to delineate some sort of a narrative, a truthful narrative to deliver to our audience, to keep people informed. If at the end of the day, it's still going to be withheld from us, I have a major issue with that. And I'm sure you probably do too. So I'm curious if you want to comment.
100%, 100, which, I've been one of the more vocal in this way, I would say. And I can say that this is actually going back years. Even though I am fully supporting Trump and the White Hats, I have no problem criticizing their methods, number one, and sometimes their thinking, because it doesn't make sense. Now, part of the reason it doesn't make sense is because they don't tell us much. So when you try to add, X plus Y plus Z, you get some ridiculous conclusion that might be way off bounds. We are not getting the truth from either side, and all of us know that now, right? But what's worse is this idea that we may never get the truth, and that's not going to be acceptable. I can tell you that right now, okay? And if I have breath in my body, this Absolutely. Is, I am going to disclose every little damn item that I can find.
The part of it, Kerry, is, let's just be honest here. We've tolerated, the American people and the people around the world have tolerated being lied to. We've tolerated this mass deception from both sides because we've understood it to be necessary to the art of war, number one, but also because we believe that all of it was going to be disclosed, that this is where we're headed. We're headed toward disclosure. We don't want a world that's curated for us by people who, make these decisions about what we can and can't handle. That's cabal
right.
type
That's
thing.
got to go. That's got to go.
And we're not going to accept that. So if that's, I mean, I think we have to send that message.
Yeah, and this,
we're not going to accept
and really, I would speak directly to 107 on this score. The reason he doesn't talk to me, he told me to my face, is because I will get him to tell the truth, which will violate his security oath with the White Hats. Okay. Now, one can appreciate that during the time of war. There has to be a certain amount of clandestine activity that is completely secret from the enemy. But even then, I have thought to myself, if you're both using AI and AI looks at the playing board, both AIs are going to come to the same conclusion. And they're not necessarily going to steer their answers to whoever's asking the questions, if you understand me. So what I'm saying here is that the truth doesn't care who hears it. You know what I mean? The truth is the truth. It doesn't mean, God wins. Of course, God wins. God is God. That's a stupid saying. It just pisses me off every time. This kind of thinking.
I'm definitely guilty of that, Kerry. All
right. All right. Well, but, think about it logically. Okay. Just think about it. The cosmos, everything in the world, including light and dark and every color in between, is all under God. So of course God wins, and God's not trying to win. He's there already. He has to be. He will always be there, and he's always been there, whatever, he's not some old man sitting on a cloud. Okay. So don't go around thinking, he's going to kiss away your pain. It's ridiculous. Okay. That's not what it's about. Humans are going to have to come of age, and they are. Okay. This is the thing. This is why we're having this conversation. If they weren't able to handle the truth, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So yes, if this video can possibly be seen by Juan and others that are working with him, for example, because in a sense, they're our only hope, because the dark side is not going to tell you the truth except cloaking it the way they've been doing for eons, right? So it's kind of interesting that we're having to deal with two sides, one of which supposedly wants to save us, but they have a problem because they're hung up. First of all, there are a lot of old men in that group, and a lot of them actually have a lot of the perceptions of reality that they got from our controllers, if you will. One of those things is to actually take the human intelligence and think less of it. First of all, intelligence tests are a joke. They don't measure something that humans have a huge quotient of, which is called emotional intelligence. They can't even touch it, fact of the matter. And the fact of this kind of thing is that you don't realize how many sayings in a given day you will say that you've been taught by your masters, okay? Not realizing that you're putting yourself down in the process, okay? Things like, oh, they want to distract you, so they made an alien thing at the mall. Humans, real humans, actually have minds that are superior, by the way, to AI in many ways, okay? They may not be able to add 20 fucking fractions, but who gives a flying fuck? That's what we have AI for. On a spiritual level, we have an unlimited amount of intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and that trumps anything an AI can come up with. I can guarantee you. And I will also say that when you go around saying, well, this is going to distract the masses, that old media thinking that, we'll throw one fish out there and then we'll throw a red flag over there and all the people are going to look over there because that's stupid and they can't keep more than two thoughts in their head at one time. That is actually how the Illuminati think of you. Okay. But when I hear those same words coming out of Juan's mouth, I just want to hit the fucking ceiling because it's insane. Do you know how many brilliant humans are on the planet right now? Do you know how many even children that are being born right now that are fucking geniuses, what you would consider a genius, you know, which is just probably even a normal human with a greater IQ, you know, IQ, EQ, whatever. All I'm saying is that people have been shortchanged, have been denigrated by their masters. It's part of the programming. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's what they've been teaching you. They have taught women to kiss ass constantly, not to speak. I know a woman who is very eloquent, who is a Mormon, who is going to come forward and, you know, have a platform. I sort of tried to teach her some things, and her father stepped in, found out she wanted to do that. And as a Mormon, he said, no, fuck that. Our women don't do that kind of thing. Shut the fuck up. And she did it. This is insane. And this is, what is this, 2024? I'm not talking about 1900s. I'm talking about the year 2024. Okay. This kind of double talk and bullshit and corralling humans this way and telling them that they're less than that way. And, you know, putting in everything, ruining their food, ruining their lighting, ruining their water. And still, what do? We fucking survive and we transform and we surmount. Okay. Because of our creator that you're so fond of talking about, that you don't realize what he, she, whatever it gave you. Okay. That's part of our heritage that these controllers don't actually have access to. A lot of them, because they're on the dark, have basically limited their own selves in these ways. They're crippled inside, as John Lennon would say. So it's really important. If I say anything tonight, I would say, stop fucking saying you're sorry for being alive. Stop apologizing. Stop acting like fake humans. So many people don't like Trump because what did he do? He removes these obstacles, these social obstacles, and just acts like a regular person. How dare he? He's a president. He's not supposed to be a human being. Our strength is our humanness. Okay. We are actually a mixture of umpteen alien races. Okay. We come from the stars, as Bob Dean would say, and we will return to the stars. And that's not just the children of Cain, so to speak, you know, that these Bible thumpers want to say. Okay. It's all of us. Okay. We're from Lyra. We're a humanoid species. Okay. And we are inhabiting galaxies off this planet to live in other places and colonizing the moons and of Saturn and Jupiter and so on. This is information from whistleblowers. All right. They have much better things to do than sit there and lie. Okay. They've dedicated their entire lives. They make no money from coming on my show. They put themselves and their families in danger, great danger. They often lose family members. Clifford Stone lost his son. I think it was his son. Bob Dean lost his daughter. I mean, these people pay with their lives or the lives of their families to bring you the truth. And what do you do with it? Ignore it. You don't tell your children. You act as though it never happened. You know,
well, I mean, let me ask you this.
Illuminati game.
I agree with you in principle, but I mean, all this dysfunction that we're talking about in terms of the way that people process information, how easily people can be distracted and so forth. I think a lot of that is an old mentality that's being kind of shed through this whole process. But I also think that the fundamental core of it all, I think what it all comes down to in the end, what gave the cabal their power, their ability to mold society in the direction that they wanted, was the withholding of the truth. I mean, if you really look at a macro level, that humanity can't possibly function in a way. I mean, there are certain people who stand out as leaders, people who pursue the truth. There are certain, I guess you could say, tribes of humanity that have gone down this path. But if we're talking about humanity as a whole, how can any species be expected to function in a way that's not completely backwards, that's not completely confused, that's not completely dysfunctional when they've never been told the truth? And you've sought out the truth. You've made it your life's work to do that. But let's just be honest. We live in a universe where you have to do that. You have to seek it out. You have to go looking for it. You have to go down these rabbit holes. You have to be willing to expand your mind. You have to be willing to be thought a fool, to be thought crazy, to be criticized, to be all of these things that so many people are so afraid of. And I guess what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, yes, there are those standouts that we admire, and you're one of them. But in order for all of us really to take that massive step forward, there has to be disclosure. Because if we don't know the truth, I mean, the reality is that I think all of us have presumptions about who we are, about where we come from, about what God is, about all of these different things, about the planet. Or you mentioned flat Earth. I mean, all of these different ideas floating around. There are all these different notions, but at the end of the day, it's because we've had those fundamental truths withheld from us. And because the enemy, of course, has always sought through disinformation to confuse us, to keep us away from the truth. Because once the truth is known, then people can let go. It may be a messy process, but they can let go of all of the things that they believed were true. I mean, it's not really that complicated. You tell people the truth, they learn the truth, they go through a process of having to accept it, and the world changes. And, look, I understand that's overstating it. I mean, that's, in a sense, it's kind of like understating, I should say, the complexity of it. But really, that's what it comes down to. And if people are going to perish in this process, as they already have.
Part of the deal, okay? And he was a twisted, mofo himself. But the reality is he's not the only one. His island is not the only island. So, yeah, you can make a big thing about the Epstein list, but how many other lists are out there? How many other islands were being used in this way and are doing so right this very minute? Okay. I think we've already exposed Epstein to the degree. I think we should be exposing these other people, whether it's Richard Branson or whoever it happens to be, and I can't tell you who they are, but I can definitely tell you there's more than just Epstein on this pile, okay, of shit. So this is really, we have to keep pushing. I think we're going to continue to push. I think we're going to push harder and harder. And I think that we need the truth out. And we need the people at January 6th to be released from prison as soon as possible.
Amen.
Some of these people are old grandmothers that were loyal American citizens their whole life. They did nothing wrong. Okay.
Grace.
It is insane that our government has turned totalitarian. And why is it that you have to be a so-called Democrat or Republican to say the truth about the government? It is a totalitarian shit show. That's a fact. America is not free. We are not a free country. We are surveilled to the nth degree in every way, shape, and form. It didn't teach you anything. It taught you that, right? So, medical tyranny is absolutely prolific. Okay. It's everywhere. And people are still falling for it. Your brothers, your sisters, your mothers, your fathers.
That's right.
They're all still falling for it. This is what we're all about. Yes, it requires awakening. Yes, it requires the truth. And it's going to continue. I mean, that's the good thing. The good thing is that the waves of the future are in our favor. This is where it's going to go.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, I just wanted to ask you quickly before we break. The last time that you and I spoke, of course, it was with Mike Gill, and that was quite a fiery interview. I wasn't really sure what to expect, and certainly, it initially it was planned as just a one-on-one interview with Mike, and then he saw our conversation with Janine on Turn the Page, and then all of a sudden he wanted to have you on the show. So I didn't really know which direction it was going to go. So I figured folks out there would be curious just to kind of hear your overall take on on that conversation, if you want to call it a conversation. At certain points, it was quite fiery, quite testy. And I've never have I had to mute somebody's microphone before. I really thought that I wasn't going to have to do that, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I think we both stated we have respect for Mike. I would welcome him back on the show for another conversation. This isn't about bashing him, but I'm just curious to get your takeaway from what happened in that conversation.
Well, first of all, so you can understand my behavior, is that I've been talking to and dealing with whistleblowers both in person and online for 20 years, basically. And so it wasn't a new experience for me to be with somebody who, was feeling slighted, was feeling that his information that he worked, that his children's lives were threatened over, that his own life was threatened over, being taken too superficially, not acted on, etc. Now, we do not know if and when and how the White Hats will act on any piece of information they get. Okay. This is part of the problem we have, is everything is incredibly secret. And out of secrecy comes a sort of fomenting of suspicion, backbiting, and all kinds of problems. Okay. I have tried to urge Juan to come forward in a more egalitarian way, I guess you might say, as the lawyer he really is, and talk to Mike Gill, but also possibly to bring him alongside and give him more truth than he was willing to do. That's, these are decisions I have no influence over, and this is what the White Hats decide. And I'm sure he doesn't decide on his own. I'm sure he's working with an incredible team, as he's told me, generals and AI and even Trump. Okay. So there's a group, not just one, making these decisions as to how they treat, if you will, a whistleblower disclosing information, how they have to vet it, how it gets how they put they put General Flynn as the one that was supposed to at least dialogue with Gill, and that out of that came a lot of angst and animosity and suspicion. Again, I did think that Mike Gill and the people that were behind him basically underestimated me. I think that they thought that he could convince me by his barrage of information to abandon the idea that there are white hats and that Juan was a good guy and so forth. So that never happened, and it never would. But they don't know that. So in some ways, he was kind of at a disadvantage because they don't know who I am. They probably never saw one of my videos in their lives. And, they don't understand the person that he was dealing with. Okay.
So you're talking about people behind the scenes who kind of
influencing him Mike Gill
to get you on the show so that he could have kind of a showdown.
Deciding, yes, to see if he could, kind of, because I was kind of drawing the attention of the audience to a more balanced view that included, 107, Trump, who was really running, General Flynn, etc. So it's complex. All I'm saying is that I think that he was being given some false information. Now, anyone can be given false information, and anyone can fall for false information. And it really, you really are in the game a long time. Mike wasn't born yesterday. He's extremely knowledgeable. He is maybe a little over emotional at this time, but there might be some really good reasons for him being in the state he's in. Again, threats to himself, his children.
I mean, all of us are angry enough with all the secrecy. I can only imagine what
people that aren't acting on his information. Now, recently, Trump has even used the word Pandora's box in recent, speeches. So there is a constant reference right now to something that Mike Gill was also contributing his knowledge to, which is these Pandora papers that actually are on the internet and is an association of journalists. I think they call themselves something like ICU. or something. And you can go read them, and you can see that it is exposing world leaders, where they hide their money. And to some degree, I think it touches on maybe, I don't think it goes deeply into it. I have read some of those papers. Okay, so I know what I'm talking about. And Juan was even getting the Pandora papers confused with the Panama papers. Okay, they're two different sets of intel. They may all relate to some similar things, but nonetheless, the division and descriptions are different. So you're asking me how I thought. I really,
Oh, that's good.
all I was
you gave me
sort of
exactly what I was
aware that there was something motivating Mike behind the scenes that was more than just, let's have an interview and talk about my stuff. It was more of I think, a desire to kind of influence me, and or, take down some of the things that I stood for, or whatever it was. In other words, it wasn't just an idle conversation. He had actually a goal, and I'm not saying I know what the goal was, but I have a theory on that.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, my last question, Kerry, because this is a question that I've been getting constantly from people, and then I'll let you go because I know we've been on for a while. The round table that we were supposed to have with Juan and Nino, people are still emailing me saying, when is the round table? When's the round table? Now,
Yeah, right.
I had a conversation with Nino, thanks to you. I would love to have another one. And I reached out through Nino to Juan to offer him an invitation to my interview. I never got a response. I didn't really expect that I would. We've kind of been over this before, but it seems to be a lack of willingness to talk to myself, to talk to you. I mean, at least you're part of this group. I think simply the weight of your work, and you're ultimately who you are. You're Kerry Cassidy. I think that it's really hard for them to at least not keep you at least somewhat plugged in terms of what's going on, because you really are a heavyweight out there. Someone like myself, I think, is easier to kind of marginalize, but I think a lot of people are sort of wondering to themselves, if we're all on the same team here, why don't we have this conversation? If we're really if all of us are, I mean, I know who I am. I know where I'm coming from. I can't speak for anyone else out there, but I certainly know that I have good intentions. I'm not a perfect person, but I'm in this for the right reasons. Presumably Juan is as well. Presumably all these other people are. So why not get together and have this conversation? Why this whole, I mean, I get the fact that he wants to keep his narrative and he wants to, he's afraid of deviating from it. But at a certain point, I think it becomes more important to unite the Patriot movement, especially in this year of chaos that we're going into. And if you've got all of these people, I mean, we both agree that, the lack of the truth is just a breeding ground for chaos. It's a breeding ground for disinformation. It makes it really easy in a lot of ways for the enemy to operate in our community. When we don't have the real players coming together, the people who are really fighting on the same side. And it makes people out there who see this and say, okay, well, why aren't they doing this round table? What gives here? Who's not playing for the right side? So, and again, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. All I'm saying is this is what goes through people's minds. So give us your final thoughts on that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, well, it kind of goes with the territory that Juan has already sort of, I don't know, squared off around himself. And I've actually addressed this very directly with him. I have told him, it's kind of like, if you choose, when you're going to run a company, when you're going to start a country, if you don't get alongside with you some of the best minds and the most educated, but beyond that, you have to have a very wide bucket, if you will, to bring on side the best of the best, right, in order to lead and to be a good leader. Okay, you don't just consult yourself, you consult the best. And by the same token, unfortunately, he has chosen to actually do the opposite, in my opinion. Okay, and this is surveying the media landscape, if you will. And I am sorry, but he has chosen people that are the weakest in this area. Okay, they're the least experienced. They are often completely dazed and confused and blinded by this religious fervor that, by the way, harks back to the Vatican and the reptilians. All right. So there's a huge amount of mind controlled people out there, and he is chosen to be interviewed by a lot of those people. And, it's because he believes, or appears to believe at least, this religious fanaticism. And it is fanatic. I mean, it's far right, far right, fundamentalist Christian viewpoints. Now, I know that when you look at the populists out there, one of the hallmarks of the Republican Party was the far right religious group. And they have money and influence, and those people needed to be brought on side. So that's what they do. They go after those people. Unfortunately, they're not the brightest. They're not, they're not the most open-minded. They're not, whatever.
But that makes people really more suspicious of one, that he won't.
Yes, I know that. So what I have noticed is a pattern. There is a pattern to the people that he talks to. And another thing that goes on with him, and I'm even in a group with him, and what's hilarious about the group is a lot of the people are quite, maybe fairly high level media people. And they shut the fuck up all the time. They don't challenge him. They don't even speak. It's actually kind of a silly group to even have, because no one talks to anyone pretty much, except on superficial bullshit. So what I'm saying here is that secretly, even the people that deny that 107 is JFK Jr. treat him like JFK Jr. in any way. They're afraid to be, straight with him. And I've told him this. It's that star power kind of, miasma that instill, because I worked in Hollywood for 20 years, I don't give a fuck about that kind of shit. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, we're all stars. So I don't, it doesn't make me mince words. It doesn't make me kiss ass. And of course, I didn't rise very high in Hollywood, because I didn't kiss ass. Okay. And I still don't. And I didn't do it when I was a little kid with my parents either. The fact of the matter is that when you're talking about putting together a round table and Juan coming forward to talk to you and various other people and good journalists, good questions will be asked that he doesn't want to answer. He likes to dominate the conversation. That's the other thing these journalists all do. They're completely quiet 90% of the time. And in fact, sometimes 99% of the time. And all they do at the end of when is agree with him.
You would think that the White Hats would have figured this out by now, though, that if
I know.
If he's only bringing, I mean, don't they have anyone else who's willing to come on and actually,
I said, look, if you don't want to do it, why don't you bring someone else who's willing to, at least talk to us? I mean, it's insane. Okay.
I mean, you take somebody like SG Anon, he's willing to talk to pretty much anybody. He doesn't, he'll go on any show.
Yeah, and he's good at kissing ass as well, I have to say. I mean, I love SG, but let's call a spade a spade. So, look, I'm telling you that this is the problem. It is a problem. They do have a hierarchical sort of strategizing, military oriented group. I understand we're still in the battle, okay? And during battle, any military person will tell you that you have to have a pecking order, and you have to follow certain protocols, and you have to have certain amount of secrecy. So it may be that he is simply too vulnerable. And considering who he really is, that could be completely true, okay? That if he says the wrong thing, it could blow the whole place up. Okay. And yet one would think he's gotten very skilled at avoiding questions. I know he has, because I know direct questions have been asked and he doesn't answer them.
He just redefines the question when it's asked. Basically, he just, if he hears a question that he doesn't like, he just says, well, let's ask it the right way. And then he'll literally frame the question and then answer his own question.
Oh yeah. Or he'll give you, he'll give you some religious diatribe that completely takes you off the topic. Yeah, so he has his techniques. Okay. He's a wonderful speaker. He's a brilliant mind. And I think people would love to engage with him more if he was more approachable in that way, but he has actually sequestered himself very carefully. And maybe, again, with some good reason, although I think it's wearing very thin at this time, which is why we're having this conversation. I agree with you. And you know what? I was the one who suggested the roundtable, not Nino, even though Nino is, because Nino's relationship to Juan, which is quite close, I had to go through Nino to get to Juan with the idea. Initially, he kind of semi said yes, and then he went on a trip to Africa and was supposedly not reachable, even though you can reach anyone in Africa any day of the week, you know, and was out of pocket. And another thing Nino told me is he was riding up and down streets with, you know, Hez estate, and so he was too busy. Whatever. We're only the Patriots that to support him in every way, shape, and form. So just ignore us. Why don't you?
Well, it's kind of like you're also saying that, you know, I mean, it's one thing if you don't want to talk to one of us as an individual, but it's also, in a sense, it's denying our entire audience. And you have a massive following. I have a following that's growing as well. People who trust that we're in this for the right reasons and we're seeking the truth. And if we're in a situation where we've got leaders who won't have the real conversations, it's kind of the same thing as the mainstream media, you know, like throwing you know, underhand pitches at the elites when they interview them, you know, like not even giving them tough questions. And I understand the whole mentality, but I think, don't you think it's kind of far-fetched to think that if Juan went on your show or my show, that he could actually, you know, that we could ask a question that could somehow unravel the entire plan or mess things up? I mean, don't you think that's a little bit far-fetched?
I think it is, but I think, look, I mean, they want to err on the side of caution. I'm sure there's a committee, you know, within the White Hats that makes these kinds of decisions. I don't think he makes it all by himself. But I think if we try to send a message here, it is that they have to be, you know, I've told them before, they need to have a better PR approach. In other words, in essence, they have to know more about dealing with the media and deal with us on a more egalitarian basis, and stop sort of leaning towards people that don't know anything or are religiously, I don't know, bamboozled or something, where they can't think clearly without saying God in every other sentence. And God doesn't really give a fuck if you use his name in a sentence, or if you kneel down or whatever else and kiss the ground, you know, because if he really is God, then he shouldn't give a fuck, right? He knows your heart. You don't have to pray every day. He can read your heart. Okay. He's God, by the way. Hello? So, you know, these ideas, these old-fashioned ideas that you've been taught to kiss the robe of the priests and to eat, you know, the bread and drink the wine, which is the blood of Jesus, you know, get over yourself, really, seriously.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, with all due respect, I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there who are going to listen to that and they're just going to say, well, whatever, she's just not a believer. And that's fine. You know, like it doesn't, to me, it makes no difference what you believe, what you're, I mean, look, we can have a million beliefs until,
but you know, what I'm trying to do is
people are going to continue to go on believing what they believe.
They will. They absolutely will. And I won't change their minds. I get that. But the problem is there are thinking people out there that want to be moving along, and we want the truth. Okay. That's the bottom line. And however we're going to get it, it does look extremely dim at this moment that we're going to ever get this thing called the EBS. Okay. For example, just one example. But if we are, but how are you going to change all the courts? You're going to change all of Congress, and suddenly they're going to come forward and they're going to allow you yourself, Juan, said the military is the only way. That's what he said since the beginning. He repeated it endlessly. Now, all of a sudden, the courts are the only way. I don't buy it. Congress is the only way. They're completely, you know, compromised. So contradictions abound. And this is
not to mention the whole thing about picking up arms. That was really going to be the whole topic of that roundtable to begin with. The idea of, you know, this narrative shift where 1 minute it's, I mean, literally 1 minute it's enjoy the show. And then at the next minute, it's these, these really intense conversations about people's homes getting invaded and all sorts of horrific things happening and just absolute Mad Max type scenarios on the streets. So, I mean, I think people have a reason, and then, but then he'll say, well, everyone needs to calm down and everyone needs to take a deep breath and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, don't
It
you
used to be
understand
eat your
that you're giving
popcorn,
people
enjoy
all of
the
these,
show.
you're giving all
Yeah.
of these different messages to people out there. People respect you. They're listening to you. And then there are people like us who are intermediaries, so to speak, who want to try to bring as much of the truth as possible to people. Not because we want to mess anything up for the white hats, but because we want to educate people. We want to move in the same direction. That's really the whole point. I won't pontificate on that anymore. I think we made our point clear. We've been on now for I think a couple of hours, so it's probably a good idea we sort of wind things down, Kerry. This has been a great conversation as usual. Project Camelot Portal.com. Tell folks a little bit about that before we wind things down tonight, where they can find you, what you're going to be up to in the near future, anything you want to include.
Okay, well, let me just say in closing that we are all part of a family, and especially those of us who do support Trump and just support the ideas that were carried forward by the white hats that go back to JFK and the courage that that man had. Okay. And if we can even approach that level of openness with the white hats, they should be mirroring his methods in this way. I'm not saying he was a perfect man. I am saying he's the inspiration for the white hats and why they do what they do. And with that in mind, I would say there needs to be a more open dialogue with the members of the alternative media that are supporting you, that are talking and encouraging people to learn more about your platform, who are bringing voters to you every day, that kind of thing, and so on. So I think we really are on the verge of a big change. I think it's going to happen, whether anyone likes it or not. And I think this conversation is a reflection of that.
I agree. I think this is the year where it has to happen. And like I said, we've tolerated it now for a very long time. And hearing that, any sort of suggestion that they're just going to, let the credits roll and they're not going to go into any type of truth and reconciliation period, people aren't, that's not going to fly. I don't think that's going to fly. But we'll put a pin on that for later. We'll pick this up during our next conversation. As a matter of fact, it looks like we're going to be doing another roundtable next week with Gene Decode. So that's going to be really, really exciting. And Gene has some really interesting information that he's going to share. I'm not going to get into what. You'll have to tune in, but that's going to be, I believe, the 18th next week. So I'll get to see you pretty soon, Kerry, which will be great. So thank you so much for joining us once again. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We've had quite an audience, as we typically do. And I just want everybody out there to know that we really genuinely appreciate everybody taking the time to listen and showing up here and being a part of this chat, being a part of this conversation. It really does mean the world. So thank you, everybody. God bless and Godspeed. I'll be back soon with another report. And until then, Patriot out.
Take care.
Take care, Kerry.